Using Geometer Sketchpad to draw your initials means that we'll be using the straight edge tool or the segment tool. So we'll change from selecting the arrow tool, which is the general all-purpose tool. We'll go get the straight edge tool, the segment tool, and to use this you simply click on your mouse and hold and drag. So I'm going to use this to draw my initials, and I want you to notice a few things. First of all, if the segment turns red when I'm connecting something to it, it means that the point that I've just put down is now a part of that segment. So let me go and show you what I mean by this. In the case of this segment right here, it's not connected to my vertical segment here. It is completely independent, and dragging this segment around has no effect on the rest of the sketch. However, in this case, I cannot move this segment off the vertical piece because it's connected, and there's a difference in these two behaviors that you need to be aware of. So this particular segment is connected by this point to the upright, to the vertical segment, whereas this one is not. Okay, so that's the first behavior you need to be aware of in Sketchpad. So I'll continue drawing my initials. So now I'll make an M, and I am going to click and hold and drag until I get this shape generally drawn like I want, and then I'll go back and get the arrow tool so that I can point out a few things. First of all, this point is the end point of both this segment and this segment. So when I drag this point, I will be dragging both of those segments that it is a part of. Likewise, this point is the end point of these two segments, so when I drag that point, it drags the associated two segments, and the same is true down here. So I can change the attributes of my M by dragging the points or by dragging the segments. So if I were to just drag this segment, you can see what happens there. Alright, so let me go get the segment tool again, and let me make my last initial a K, and let me make sure that I connect this point to that vertical segment. You can tell that it's connected because the segment itself turned red, and then let me make my last segment right there, and then go back and get the arrow tool. It's important when I'm doing a sketch, once I've finished using one of these other tools, to return my cursor to the arrow tool so that I don't inadvertently select something that I don't want, or so that I don't inadvertently draw another segment when I mean to be working with the segments I already have. So let's just go and explore some of the attributes of these segments that I've drawn. Since this point is connected to the vertical segment, dragging it, I'm only allowed to drag it up and down the segment. It's constrained to move along that segment only. And since it's the end point of these two segments, whatever happens to this point also happens to these two segments. So that's an important behavior in Sketchpad to be aware of. Likewise, by dragging this point, I can affect the behavior of the two segments that it's the end point of. So these two segments are constrained by the behavior of this point. And I can drag this segment up and down, but I can lengthen it, or I can change its length to be shorter, but I cannot remove it from this segment to which it's connected. It's constrained by that fact as well. This segment, which is not connected to the vertical segment, I can move it around anywhere, I can do anything I want. It is not a part of this other segment. I can overlay it, but that doesn't make it a part of it. It is not in any way constrained by anything to do with this vertical segment. Alright, so now that I've drawn my initials, and I can of course change anything about them anytime I want by dragging some part of it. Suppose I want to measure something, some particular aspect of these segments. For example, let's say I want to know how long this particular piece is here. You'll notice that it's selected now. So just to to call your attention to what a segment looks like when it's connected, when it's selected. It's got these sort of reddish highlighted lines around it. So deselected, selected, deselected, selected. And I simply do that by clicking on or off the segment. I can now, with this segment selected, measure its length. So I go to the measure menu and I select length, and it will tell me, and it's telling me in centimeters because that's the preferences that I have my particular version of Sketchpad set to, 4.022 centimeters. I also have my preferences set to measure out to the thousandths place. Not everyone would want that setting, but that's what I have. You'll also notice that upon measuring the length of this segment, Sketchpad also labeled the endpoints A and B. And so that's a particular behavior of Sketchpad that you can change as well. Notice that my measurement is selected. I can also deselect it by clicking off. So I've measured the length of this particular segment. Suppose I want to know what angle is formed, the number of degrees in the angle formed by this middle part of the M here. To measure an angle, I need to select in order the 3 points that form the angle. And when I say in order, it means that first is one of the endpoints, second must be the vertex of the angle, and third is the last endpoint. So with those 3 points selected, I have defined this angle right here. So I'll go and use the measure menu and say measure angle, and it, as you'll notice, it has now labeled those points C, D, and E so that I know which angle it's referring to. I know which points form that angle. And Sketchpad uses the convention that our textbook uses as well. The middle letter, D in this case, is the vertex of the angle. So this is angle CDE. So this angle right here is 77.959 degrees, measured out to the thousandths because that's the setting that I'm using. And so this measurement is selected, and I can move it around. You saw that I could move other components of my sketch. I can also move any of the measurements. So I'll move it to go right here. Okay, so now let's see what happens when we measure an angle and then drag some component of the angle. I'm going to measure the angle of this part of my K here. So I need to select 1, 2, 3 and go to the measure menu, and it's going to, when I select angle, it's going to measure that angle that I've indicated. And you'll notice that it puts the measurement right down underneath the last measurement it did, which is not always advantageous, but you can go ahead and drag it wherever you want to drag it to. So you'll see that it's been labeled F, G, and H, and it's telling me that that's just over 81 degrees. So I wonder what happens if I drag one of the endpoints of this angle. Suppose I drag point H. Let me deselect the measurement. If I drag point H like this, you can see that it's clearly the angle is becoming more obtuse. However, as it becomes obtuse and the measurement changes, the number of degrees change, the measurement is reflecting that. So it changes, as the measurement changes as I change the angle. What if I drag this other endpoint over here? Same thing. What if I wanted this to be exactly a right angle, or as close as I can get it? I can drag and drag until I get whatever measurement I want. It's entirely dependent on my preferences of my sketch, whatever I want it to be. Okay?